So we come to Ecclesiastes chapter 9, and I would suggest to you that it is difficult to understand this chapter unless we've read what's gone so far, unless we're acquainted with what has already taken place. And in a nutshell, what the author has been saying in this book so far is this. He has struggled to find answers to the great puzzles and enigmas of life. He's a man of faith. He believes in God. He believes God is the God of this world. He believes that God is the God of the world to come. But in the context of this world, faith sometimes finds reality seems to give a different message, to declare a different story. And what he's saying in this book is, if we are people of faith, we mustn't assume that the answers will always be there to the problems and the enigmas of life. The problems and the enigmas that face people who are unbelievers are the same problems that face us. And so he addresses the problems and seeks here to give us a little bit more of a tentative answer, the answer that faith may bring. And the first thing I notice, especially in the first 9 verses or so, the first half of this chapter is this, and I've summarized it for you on the sheet. While faith affirms that the earth is the Lord's and acknowledges that God is sovereign, it doesn't provide us with the fact that we are people of faith does not provide us with any foreknowledge as to how our lives will turn out. It doesn't offer us any guarantees as to how our lives will turn out over against the other. So he makes that very clear right at the beginning of the chapter. He indicates, he knows that we are in God's hands. We're in God's hands. It's his world. But that does not supply us with any certainty about our future. And so he says in second part of verse 1, no man knows whether love or hate awaits him. Perhaps the point he's making is this. We may live life happily, or we may find life is lived under darker skies. That's the reality, isn't it? Some of us have lives that seem relatively trouble-free. Others of us have lives that seem beset by problems and difficulties. Whether we have a trouble-free life or a difficult life does not reflect on the quality of our faith or the nature of our relationship with God. The one does not equate with the other. And then he says, in the face of the inevitable human destiny of death, well, death does not seem to be affected by the sort of people we are. He mentions there people's conduct, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean. Whether you do the right thing or the wrong thing, whether you chart your life according to good things or bad things, well, says our author, it doesn't appear that those things determine the nature of your life, your future, and do not secure you against the pains and the possibilities even of premature death. The conduct, even religious observances, don't affect it. There are those who offer sacrifices and those who do not, he says. But that doesn't affect the nature of a person's future life. Even social values aren't important. Whatever we may use as bases for thinking this is a better person than that person, the reality is, and we know it in our hearts and we know it in our experience, those things do not shape to any significant degree our future. There is, of course, as he notices here, something within us that recognizes that life is something that is good and to be clung on to. There is something right about life. And yet the reality is that life often plays false to us. The living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even the memory of them is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Whatever the quality of the life that we have lived, a sudden ending may bring an end to all those things. And those things cannot be predicted on the basis of the sort of people we are or the sort of life that we have led. The whole thing seems utterly unpredictable. And those of us who are people of faith need to come to terms with that. Our friends will be very quick to point it out to us. What benefit do you have from being a Christian? And they will point to us to some of these enigmas. And to try and find trite answers is not really wise. Sometimes we simply have to acknowledge that there are those things that faith cannot comprehend and cannot understand and cannot explain. So while faith affirms that the earth is the Lord's and acknowledges his sovereign rule, it provides no guarantees or foreknowledge about the future. But then our author says something else in the next few verses, in verses 9 and through to 10. Well, he really picks it up earlier than that in verse 7. And he says this: though life is perplexing, and it can be painful, and it can be short, nevertheless, faith lives in humble trust in the one who is the world's Lord, and trusts him without asking questions about the future. It welcomes the present, however enigmatic life may appear. Faith receives the present as a gift from God and does not ask speculative questions about the future. And our author tells us that there are those things that we can receive and recognize as part of God's goodness to us. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for it is now that God favors what you do. I have a friend of mine who is a little bit of a sophisticate when it comes to good wine. So it's always nice to visit him, because I can guarantee that the drink that I'm offered is rather better than that I might sometimes buy for myself. My purchases seldom get much above the slightly up from vinegar. But his are well worth a tipple. And he says to me sometimes, a couple of glasses of wine in an evening brings mellowness. And he's right. I can identify with that sense of mellowness and contentment with life. Of course, drink much more than that and you have other problems. But, or in my mother-in-law's case, if you sniff the cork, you have a problem. Actually, that was more true, I have to say, of her sister than herself. There are those things that bring mellowness and pleasure to life, says our author, and we should thank God for them. There are those things that bring a degree of contentment, even in the midst of a troubled life, and we thank God for them. Now here's a verse for the ladies. Always be clothed in white and always anoint your head with oil. In other words, he says, make sure you have a nice wardrobe. So here is a verse to justify retail therapy. Or at least to say to us that the provision of clothing and the pleasures that a new robe brings and so on and so forth are to be received as a gift from God and to be thanked for it. He brings contentment, he brings comfort, he brings companionship. He mentions especially here the companionship of marriage, but he could doubtless have mentioned other companionships too. God grants to us friends. And though friends can sometimes play us false, don't we thank God for those friends that we have, upon whom we can lean, and supporters in time of trouble, and indeed the pleasures that we have from them in going out and doing things with them, even in times of good. And then there's activity. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. Well, yes, where you're going, there's neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom, but there is now. Physical effort, the reward of going out and mowing the lawn and it looking so much better and feeling good for having done it. Of course, there's a problem, isn't there, John? You get all the leaves up and 2 days later, there they are again. But I'll bring my hoover down. There is physical effort, mental reflection. It's good to think, isn't it? Whatever the things that we enjoy thinking about, things I enjoy thinking about are probably not necessarily the things that you enjoy thinking about, but the pleasure of mental effort. The excitement of the application of knowledge. I can remember the joy I had when I first managed to laminate a floor. Applying new knowledge and finding it worked. The pleasure of the application of knowledge. All these things are deeply satisfying. And the author wants to, in the midst of the darkness of his analysis, to say to us there are many good things that we receive from God. Don't get things out of balance. Don't so emphasize the bad that you forget the good. Yet, his conclusion is this. And he's made this point on other occasions during his book, and he re-emphasizes it here. Don't become preoccupied with the pleasures of life. And don't allow the pleasures or pursuit of them to disguise life's frustrations. When I flew out to Budapest, Friday just over a fortnight or whatever it was ago, because flying to Budapest is only one step better than flying to Prague on a Friday, because you had people coming out for stag parties and hen parties in Budapest for the weekend. And at the stage that I encountered most of these young ladies and young men, it was fairly satisfactory, but they were going out, frankly, to get drunk. Our society now, all too often, is a society of binge drinking and other things that we ourselves may engage in, because we can do different things from the binge drinkers, which are intended to disguise life's frustrations. To drink ourselves into a stupor, perhaps, or to do something that blocks out the fact that life is frustrating. To use the good things of God that can assist that sense of well-being and contentment to actually disguise the fact that life is frustrating. And so the writer of our book warns us against that particular course of action. He says a number of things. He says talents and merit, physical and mental efforts, seem to be rewarded on the basis of mere chance. It's good to do these things. We find pleasure in them. But if we establish our own well-being on the basis of those things, or think that that shapes our future, then we'll be futile. We'll be fools. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong. Nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. And then he reminds us that the visit of either disaster or the grim reaper is utterly unpredictable. As fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so men are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. And some of you know exactly that. You were doing something one day and you discover the next day that your whole world has changed. The securities that you were building on have disappeared. A redundancy has occurred, whatever it might be. And then no man knows when his hour will come. The grim reaper comes indiscriminately of age or anything else. My brother-in-law works for Green King, and of course they've made great sport out of the Grim Reaper in their adverts. But the reality is that the Grim Reaper is someone who does come and intervene at times that seem so inappropriate and incorrect and wrong. Fame and fortune too, he says, however much they are deserved, are fleeting. He gives this example of this poor fellow who saves the city by his wisdom, but because he came from the wrong side of the tracks, he's soon forgotten. He'd saved the city, but that was soon lost. I think British society is particularly guilty of building up its idols, then destroying them and forgetting them. We see that in the way that it treats its footballers, its cricketers, whoever it is. One day that they are abject failures, the next day they're great and wonderful successes, and the day after that they're being criticised again. Fame and fortune, however much it is deserved, is fleeting. And even goodness and wisdom is a fragile plant. Look what he says in verses 17 and 18. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. We agree with that. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. Don't we agree with that? But one sinner, one bad person, one bad apple can destroy much good. So goodness and wisdom is a fragile plant. Now, what do we make of all this chapter in the light of the message of the book as a whole? It's this. While we know the ultimate security of our author lies in the reality that there is a life beyond death in which these things will be reconciled and answers will be given, he doesn't duck the issues of the pain and suffering of present life, the inequalities of life, the puzzles that our present experience brings us. But despite the fact that these things might discourage faith, he does not abandon his faith. He does not allow these things to undermine his trust in God. The point he's making is this: God is greater than our experiences. He's greater, and his blessings are present even in the midst of our severest buffetings. That's what faith says. It looks beyond the experience of life. It looks to one who is above and beyond life, although in all of that life, and says he is a greater reality than my present circumstances. I put it this way at the end of your notes. His shadow may be perceived as he passes, but he always remains out of sight. That's the nature of God. We can see his shadow as he's gone before. We can see the traces of where he's been. We can recognize that aroma of his presence, but he always remains out of sight. But he is there. And Jesus himself recognized that. My God, why have you forsaken me? He felt forsaken. He expressed that sense of forsakenness that he experienced, but he still cried out to my God. Even in his uttermost trial, Jesus lived by faith in that which was unseen, yet greater than that which is seen. And I think that's what the writer to Ecclesiastes is trying to do for us. He's saying all too often we can be trite. We can offer easy answers to the problems of life, not only to ourselves, but those who ask about our faith. We can offer answers that ultimately do not satisfy ourselves, if we're honest, and certainly won't satisfy a serious inquirer as to the faith. We've got to be real and realistic about what we say. And here is someone who has looked at all the various angles as he's worked through his book, he's looked at all these different angles, the frustrations and the problems and the difficulties and the enigmas of life, and he faces them fair and square. But he says there is something greater than even these things upon which I build. I build upon God, my knowledge of him, my revelation of himself to me and to others. There I build. And faith, thus built, is able to face the complex issues of life, not with answers, not with trite replies, but with a recognition that behind all the complexities of life lies one who is the Lord of life. And in him, the writer bids us place our trust. Let's pray together. Father, we want to acknowledge before you today that all too easily we slip into the belief that somehow life owes us a favour. And we have expectations of the future that are based upon our present endeavours, our present experience, and yet we recognise that if we build our hopes there, they will never satisfy, and they will very often let us down. We recognise the inequities of life, the puzzles of our own experience. And yet this morning we stretch out our hands once again to you who are above and beyond and yet in our experiences, and pray that you would grant us the faith to hold fast to who you are, to recognize that this life is not the end, and the questions we have now will have an ultimate resolution when we see you face to face. So bless us, we pray, and especially we pray for those who are today in the midst of deep and difficult circumstances and trials. Grant to them the faith that sees in the darkness the light of the presence of God,